Hello everyone, I am the storyteller. Tonight I'll tell you a story wrapped in silence, soaked in dread and experience Elias Thorne would never escape after stepping into a place long forgotten by the world. A place not haunted by ghosts, but by memory itself. So sit back, let the darkness settle, and listen carefully. Because what happened in the monastery at the edge of the cliffs still echoes when the wind shifts. I do not remember arriving. I remember the dust, how it clung to my skin like a second height, and I remember the taste of it in the back of my throat, coppery and bitter like I'd been chewing corns. But I don't remember the road that led to the monastery of the third revelation. There was a car, surely a driver, maybe. A flight that touched down in Albuquerque on a witheringly hot morning, and yet all of it is air, hollow. They say trauma distorts memory, but I believe now that the land can do it too. There are places on this earth that no longer believe in time. You can walk into them with a wristwatch and a plan and emerge holding only fragments of a name you once used to answer to. Places so old they have started to forget you back. The monastery stands at the edge of a wine-scour cliff built of red sandstone that drinks the daylight and sighs at night. From afar it looks abandoned, up close it feels curated. A still life of faith and ruin. The crucifixes hang upside down, not out of sacrilege, but erosion. The bells never ring, but sometimes I hear them anyway. I came here because I study cults. I thought I could learn something from this place, but I've been here for 3 days or 30, and I think now that it's studying me. I first heard of the monastery of the third revelation during a panel at a adult anthropology conference in Phoenix, one of those underattended backroom sessions that make you question every professio, now choice you've ever made. A silver-haired woman in a shawl made of what looked like coyote hide handed me a brochure after my talk. The paper was thick and yellowed, smelled faintly of creosote and old parchment. On the front, a grainy black-and-white photo of a crumbling mission-style structure half swallowed by canyon shadow. Beneath it, a single line of type. Where God fell silent, we began listening. At the time, I mistook it for eccentricity, just another crank group pretending to have unearthed something sacred in the high desert. I'd spent my career chasing these types. Cults, closed communities, fringe religious enclaves. I didn't believe in devils or angels, but I'd cataloged plenty of human behavior that suggested something wants to be worshipped. The woman never gave her name. She only said, "We preserve memory here. Not facts, not truth, just memory." And then, "We've read your work, Dr. Thorne. You belong with us." I should have thrown it away, but something about that photograph, it lingered. The cliff, the way the shadows devoured half the structure like a mouth. I kept it, pinned it to the corkboard in my office in Berkeley. It unnerved my students. I liked that. Then, for months later, a letter arrived, handwritten, sealed in wax. It bore no return address, only a stamp. Los Muertos, New Mexico. Inside was a formal invitation from the so-called New Mexico Memory Preservation Society, inviting me to consult on their archival integration project. No further details. All expenses paid. No timeline. At the bottom, a familiar signature. Miriam Blackwood. I hadn't heard that name in over 20 years. Not since college, not since the incident at Joshua Tree. Her presence changed everything. Miriam had always been drawn to the edge of the map, Even when we were kids, the stranger the belief system, the more eager she was to inhabit it, wear it like a costume, then discard it when she found something darker. She had vanished after grad school. Some said she joined a commune in Mexico. Others whispered about government work. I assumed she'd overdosed in the desert. It fit. And now she was inviting me to a monastery that didn't officially exist. I said yes, not for the cult. For her, there was no airport, no train, just a battered pickup truck waiting for me outside a general store and a ghost town crossroads called Vado del Silencio, 2 hours south of Anywhere Paid. The driver didn't speak. He wore mirrored sunglasses and a clerical collar that looked too clean. As we drove, the roads narrowed to dirt, then to gravel, then to paths better suited for hooves than tires. Eventually, the road disappeared altogether. I remember the cliffs first. They loomed like teeth, jagged and sun-bleached, casting long shadows. Even at noon, the air grew thinner. My ears popped. The land felt pre-verbal, like it had been speaking long before our languages were born, and had now grown tired of being understood. We reached the edge of a ridge, and there it was, the monastery. It clung to the stone like a wound, 3 stories high, built into the rock itself, with no clear architectural lineage. Spanish colonial arches, Navajo motifs, settler brutalism, all mashed together like memory fragments from a dying mind. The bell tower leaned westward, as if going to something unseen. The front gate bore no lock, just a symbol, an open mouth with no tongue. When I crossed the threshold, everything in me said, "You've been here before," which made no sense. Inside, the air was cool and moist, impossibly so for the desert. It smelled of rain and iron. The walls were thick stone, veined with white mineral streaks. Candles burned in wall niches, though I never saw anyone light them. I was shown to a room on the 2nd floor, sparse monastic, bed, desk, wash basin, a narrow window facing the canyon. A single object sat on the desk, a rusted key and an envelope. Dr. Thorne. Begin where it ends. No signature. That first night I slept poorly. Not from fear, from recognition. The wind outside carried voices, not whispers. Laughter, children, a woman humming a song I remembered from a dream I hadn't had yet. And in the wall behind the bed, faintly breathing, not mine. The next morning, I met the residents. They called themselves the keepers. No one would say of what. They were polite, soft-spoken, eerily well-informed about my research. None wore watches. They referred to days as passages. They all claimed to be archivists, but no one could show me a single document. Miriam appeared that evening. She looked almost unchanged, older, yes, but not in the way we all age, more like she'd been preserved. Eyes sharp, smile soft, voice like she was always about to tell you something you couldn't handle. "You made it," she said, as if I'd returned. Not a ride. I asked her what this place was. She answered, "It's a memory of a monastery. We just keep remembering it." And then she handed me a book wrapped in lambskin, heavy, smelling of salt and fire. No title, just a single line carved into the cover. "If the earth forgets us, we become real." I read the book she gave me that night, or rather, I opened it and tried to read. The pages were made of something like parchment, but thicker fibrous, almost damp. The ink was red, not rust red or ink red, but a living red. Each word writhed slightly when I stared too long, like the letter's breath through the page. I told myself it was poor print quality, maybe the fibers reacting to the oil on my fingers. I didn't make it past the second page, not because I was disturbed, though I was, but because the words were wrong. Familiar but misplaced. The language resembled a blend of old Navajo, Spanish, and King James English, with phrases like the forgetful womb of stone and the sin of remembering too much. At times, entire paragraphs dissolved into indecipherable script. I closed it. My eyes ached. The next morning, the book was gone. No one claimed to have moved it. My door had been locked, but the book and the rusted key were no longer on the desk. In their place sat a stone, perfectly round, smooth as bone, about the size of a robin's egg. It was warm. I attempted to establish a routine. Morning walks, interviews with the keepers, cataloging oral traditions, if any could be called that. Most spoke in circles, never answering questions directly. They told stories the way dreams unfold, strange leaps of logic, no firm edges, symbols repeating out of sequence. But the stories shared one motif, a mouth in the cliff that devours names, a wind that speaks in the voice of the dead, and a sound, a deep, subsonic hum that makes the bones remember what the mind has forgotten. One woman, Mara, claimed she'd arrived in 1991. She looked barely 30. Another, Ezekiel, told me he was born in 1904 and had seen the monastery rebuilt twice. His eyes were milk white, cataracted, but he tracked my movements like a hawk. When I asked him what they preserved here, he only smiled. Yourself, Elias, but not the parts you like. On my third night, I think it was the third, I discovered the chapel. It wasn't on the monastery's map. Not that the map was helpful. I had begun to suspect the halls shifted. Distances changed. Rooms bled into each other. A staircase I'd taken earlier in the day no longer led anywhere. The chapel was carved directly into the cliff wall, down a corridor lined with melted candles and broken antlers. No crucifix hung above the altar, only a depression in the stone oval shaped, about the size of a human face. It looked natural, but something about the way it reached made my skin tighten. I stepped close. The air within the hollow was cooler. A faint smell, cedar smoke and wet fur. And then a sound, not a voice, not exactly, more like a vibration with intent, a message without language. And though I heard no words, I understood. You are not made of what you think. I stumbled backward, heartbeat pounding. The walls pulsed once, twice, like a great, long exhaling. Then silence. I left, and when I returned the next day, the corridor no longer existed. I confronted Miriam. You built something here, I said. Something alive, and you're feeding it. She didn't flinch. Her reply was maddeningly serene. We did not build, we remembered. The monastery is made of memory. That's why it forgets its own shape. She placed a hand on my arm and looked at me with something like pity. Elias, you came because you've forgotten what happened at Joshua Tree, but the land remembers. It always does. That name, that place, Joshua Tree. Something turned in me, like a locked door creaking. My mouth went dry. You weren't there, I whispered. But she smiled, not in denial, in confirmation. That night I started a journal, the only way to track anything. Entry 1. I arrived ... unknown. I found a chapel. It vanished. The book is gone. Smells. cedar, rust, skin, sounds, whined like whispering lungs, emotions, dislocation, recognition, entry to later that same night, heard bells, no tower in sight, saw my reflection in the wash basin smiling when I wasn't. Entry 3. Someone entered my room while I was sleeping, left a bundle wrapped in hair, in sigh, my mother's handwriting. I never brought it with me. There are inconsistencies I can't ignore. A hallway that ends in a wall at night but leads to the dining hall by day. A stone that changes color depending on who holds it. A whispered name I hear in different mouths, always mispronounced. Ellis ... Eliot th ... Elias. I began losing track of time. Miriam says this is part of the process. Time is the cost of being remembered by the earth, she said, and I realized something awful. I'm not sure what year it is. That evening, I dreamt of the mouth in the rock, but this time it opened, and inside was not a throat, but a room, stone walls, a desk, a chair, my chair, and on the desk, a single object, the stone. It pulsed with heat, then a sound. Not all who sleep wake up alone. I woke choking on dust, and on my chest, pressed against my skin, the stone from the chapel. I no longer trust the hallways. They seem innocent at first, quiet stone passages lined with sconces and aged, unchanging tapestries. But their proportions are wronged. Sometimes a corridor stretches far longer than I remember. Other times it ends too soon, the walls narrowing just enough to make me turn sideways to pass. I stop using the map they gave me. It's wrong. It's always been wrong. Worse. The monastery seems to be learning me. Each turn I take now feels ... guided. Not by hands. Not even by intent. By pattern. As if some unseen intelligence is studying my movements and smoothing the floor ahead of me like a hand flattening wet clay. I found a photograph today, tucked into a copy of The Ethics of Myth in the makeshift library on the east wing. It slipped out while I thumbed through the brittle pages, black and white, slightly curled at the edges. It showed a group of people standing outside the monastery gate, figures, all in robes, faces indistinct. But in the far left corner, half obscured by shadow, me. Not someone who looked like me. Not a trick of light or mistaken identity. It was me ... Same face, same jawline, same scar above my eyebrow from a field accident in grad school. Except there was one difference. I was smiling a real, broad, almost ecstatic grin. I haven't smiled like that since I was a child. Since before Joshua Tree. There was a year printed on the back. 1973 ... I confronted Ezekiel in the refectory. He was eating alone, sopping flatbread and some kind of herb broth that smelled like overripe citrus and sweat. I slammed the photograph down next to his bowl. What is this? He didn't even look at it. Just wiped his fingers, then said, proof, if you want it. But be careful with proof, Elias. It only tells you what you already believe. I wasn't here. I wasn't even alive. He finally looked up, his eyes milky, cloudy as old quartz. Time don't move here the way it moves in cities. This place is built from forgetting, and what's forgotten must still go somewhere. He tapped the photo. Maybe you were here. Maybe you will be. Either way, this place remembers you better than you remember yourself. I've started waking in strange places. Yesterday morning, I was on the roof. No ladder, no memory. Just there, sprawled on my back, staring into a sky that pulsed between gray and orange. I had scratch marks down both arms and dirt under my fingernails. The night before, I dreamt of an earthquake, a great churning, not beneath the monastery, but inside it, like a giant shifting in its sleep. When I awoke, a fresh crack had split the chapel floor, running from altar to threshold like a scar. I reported it to Miriam. She only nodded. It's close now. The monastery knows you. That night, Miriam sat me down and explained their cosmology, not as a sermon, as a reality. Before language, before man, there were impressions, she said. The land recorded feeling, emotion, echoes, the wind carried shape. The stones memorized form. I listened, half furious. You're talking about animism. She smiled, shook her head. No, Elias, you're talking about it. We're remembering it. She leaned in. The earth was never passive. It dreams through us. We are thoughts it tried to forget. I asked her what the monastery was really built for. Her reply was so soft I barely heard it. To house something, a memory too old to hold alone. A shape that waits, it comes at night now, not as a presence, not a ghost, but a pressure like something vast pushing against the walls of my perception. Sometimes I wake to find all my belongings rearranged, the desk turned toward the window, my boots facing the wrong direction, my notes replaced with old ones I don't remember writing. Whole pages filled with drawings of spiral mouths, weeping eyes, and a shape I keep sketching, a kind of tree, made of stone, rooted upside down, its limbs stretched like veins toward the chapel. I've started to recognize it in the cracks on the floor tonight. I walked out to the cliff edge. I don't remember leaving my room. I just opened the door. And there I was, barefoot, dressed in clothes I don't own, a woolen tunic that smelled of cedar and sweat. My hands were black with soot. Dot, dot, the wind was still. The sky was full of no stars, and across the canyon, on the opposite cliff face, a light, faint, flickering, it pulsed 3 times, then stopped. Behind me, the monastery breathed. I tried to leave today. No one stopped me. No hands grasped my arms. No walls shifted before me. I simply walked down the lone corridor toward the south wing, the one that leads to the path that leads to the trail that should, by all known topography, leave this place, except it didn't. The hallway ended in a blank wall I had never seen before. No doors, no windows, just smooth sandstone, damp to the touch. When I pressed my palm against it, I felt something shift, not in the stone, in me. A jolt, like recognition. My hand recoiled on its own. My fingertips trembled with cold. I turned around and the corridor behind me was shorter. I was closer to my room than I should have been. That afternoon, Mara, the young woman who claimed to have been here since 1991, offered to show me the archive. I followed her through 3 descending hallways that felt carved more by water than by men. The air grew heavier with each step, thick with minerals and something sweeter, sweet, like fruit rotting in sunlight. We reached a wooden door with no handle. She touched a worn carving at its center, the mouth again. The wood creaked inward, inside, shelves, hundreds of them, but they weren't filled with books, not entirely objects. A melted Polaroid camera wrapped in sage twine, dozens of bones, each with etched numbers, a braid of hair suspended in resin, a child's shoe singed at the toe, cassette tapes with no labels, a cracked porcelain mask painted with stars, and on the far wall a mural, painted directly onto stone, layered, unfinished. It showed a map, but not of any place I recognized. The monastery sat at its center, surrounded not by roads or canyons, but by concentric rings of twisted figures drawn in charcoal and ash. Some were crawling, others suspended, still others bent backward in contortions of grief or rapture. I stared for a long time. "What is this?" I asked. Mara tilted her head. "Your memory, or what we've been able to recover." That night I heard a scream. Not distant, not from the canyon, from inside the monastery. I grabbed my flashlight and followed this sound, barefoot, down toward the chapel. The halls flickered with shadow. My breath echoed like I was shouting dot, dot at the chapel threshold. I stopped. The crack in the stone had widened. No, not widened, opened, a rift, narrow and pulsing, like torn skin, leading shadow. Inside the rift, nothing, a dark so deep it drank the light from my flashlight and gave back silence. Not quiet, silence complete, obliterating, unnatural. Then a shape moved. I stepped back. I do not know what I saw. I only know what I felt, my name being pulled away from me. I said nothing to the others at dinner. They were speaking in low tones, too casually, as if rehearsed. The food tasted wrong, bitter and warm, like medicine. Miriam watched me, but didn't speak. Lucas, one of the few others who didn't seem to be alone, leaned over. "You saw it, didn't you?" I didn't answer. He smiled without joy. "I've been seeing it too, since my second week. They call it the memory root. It feeds off presence. That's what this place is. A mouth for presence." I looked at him. His pupils were wide, his voice to calm. "Are you a believer now?" I asked. His expression didn't change. Belief doesn't matter. Proximity does. That night I had the second dream, but it didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a flashback, except to something that never happened. Not in this life. I was a child, barefoot, standing at the cliff edge with a man I somehow knew was my father, but not my real father. His hands were wooden. His mouth was full of dust. He pointed into the canyon and said, "This is where we buried the first version of you." And then he pushed me. I woke before I landed, but my palms were scraped raw, full of sand and tiny pebbles. My bed was covered in dust. This morning I found something under my mattress, a cassette tape. It bore no label, just the impression of a name, handwritten in ink that had smeared from moisture. It read, Elias, 1979, M. Blackwood. I haven't listened to it yet. I don't know if I will. I'm afraid of what I'll hear, not because it might be real, but because it might be familiar. The stone, the one that first appeared in my room, the smooth one, is cracked now. A hairline fracture runs down its center. When I picked it up, I swear I felt something shift beneath my feet. And in that instant, just for a moment, the monastery's walls were glass, and behind them a colossal shape, curled like a fetus, breathing slow beneath the rock. Then it was gone, but not forgotten. Never forgotten. I waited until midnight to play the tape. The old cassette deck in the library was warped from heat and age, but still functional. The buttons stuck. The speaker crackled like static from a dying radio station. I almost stopped it 3 times before the voice came. Not a scream, not chanting, not distorted noise. A voice, my voice, younger, less worn, confused, but certain of what it saw, May 17th. They won't let me out. Miriam says it's not ready, the shape's too big. It keeps folding time back on itself like paper. You can hear it in the walls if you're quiet enough, breathing under stone. There's a pause, then, if I forget this, it's because they took it. But if you're hearing this, Elias, you're already inside it again, and you let them bring you. The voice broke. It remembers us better than we remember ourselves. Silence, and then something whispered behind the recording. Another voice, fainter, my mother's name. I returned to the chapel the next morning. The rift was wider, 2 feet across now, a mouth opening slowly inside it. There was no color, no heat. The light from my lantern died at the edge like it feared to go further, but I stepped closer, drawn to the pressure. It was like standing beside a jet engine that wasn't running, but remembered how. I whispered my own name just to test it. The rift responded, not with sound, with shape, a distortion, like a ripple in thick glass. My reflection, a twisting shadow, appeared inside the rift, then broke into pieces like glass and water. Then I heard it, a voice. His voice. I don't talk about Samuel. He died when I was 8, fell through ice on a lake in Colorado. They never found the body. I've always blamed myself, though no one else ever did. He was older. He told me where the ice would hold. I listened. He was wrong. That was the official memory, the one I built to survive, but now he's here. I saw him in the hallway that evening, just past the chapel wing. He stood at the far end, barefoot, soaked to the skin, hands trembling, eyes too wide. Elias, he said, not accusing, not angry, just naming. And then he turned and walked through a wall. I'm unraveling, I know it, but the evidence suggests otherwise. I tested myself, set a clock, recorded what I saw every hour, but the tape plays back differently each time. Once I described a stone that bled. Next time I spoke of an eclipse that no one else saw. Third time, it was just screams mine, layered and looped. The keepers smile when I mention it. Lucas won't look me in the eyes anymore. He's begun drawing symbols on the walls of his room in ash, mobs, spirals, trees with inverted roots, and the mural in the archive. It's changed. There's a new figure at its center. Wearing my coat, I demanded answers. Cornered Miriam near the empty bell tower. She stood calmly, arms folded, watching the canyon below. You knew about the tape, you knew he was here. Her gaze stayed on the horizon. I didn't bring you here, Elias, you came when you were ready. Again. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were soft. You came here once, in 1979 and in 2002. You come when you're close to breaking. This place calls you back each time more of you stays behind. I couldn't breathe. You're lying. She stepped closer. Do you remember the phrase carved into the chapel door? I nodded. If the earth forgets us. She finished it. ... We become real. I returned to my room to find something waiting. On the bed, a coat, mine, but older, sun-faded, frayed, stitched in places I don't recall damaging. Inside the pocket, the folded note, my handwriting. Don't listen to her. She's not Miriam anymore. She never was. She's the part of the place that talks, and beneath that, one final sentence. You're not the first Elias, just the loudest. Then, behind me a creak, I turned, and Samuel stood in the doorway. Smiling, Samuel didn't speak, he just waited. There, in the threshold of my room, lit only by the lantern's weak flame, he looked exactly as he did the day he dyed wet hair plaster to his forehead, lips pale, eyes too wide, to knowing. He smiled in a way that belonged to neither child nor adult. And then he turned and walked away. I followed. I didn't even hesitate. The hall was darker than it should have been, longer each step swallowed sound, as though the monastery itself had stopped listening. I moved fast, afraid if I let him out of my sight he would evaporate like the snow on that Colorado lake. But he didn't vanish. He led me to a door I had never seen before. Weathered cedar, iron bands rusted thin, no handle. Samuel turned to me. "It's your turn now." Then he stepped through the wood as though it weren't there, and the door creaked open. The smell hit me first. Moss, dust, smoke, the unmistakable metallic tang of blood inside. A round chamber, carved entirely from living rock veined and pulsing, no furniture, no light source, just the stone, wet in places, breathing. I entered, the door shut behind me, and then I saw it, a chair, simple, wooden, facing the far wall, and in the chair me, no motion, no sound, just a figure slumped forward, hands limp, head bowed. Wearing my clothes, my watch, my boots, I moved closer. The figure raised its head. The face was mine, but the eyes were wrong. Hollow, endless, like looking down a well in winter. It spoke first. Its voice was mine, younger, calmer. "We can't both leave." I stepped back. "This is a trick." It didn't move. "You're remembering forward now. Most don't survive that. But you were always good at splitting. What are you?" It tilted its head, aversion. "The one that stayed when you left last time. The one that remembered the screams, the roots, the fall. You buried me, Elias, but the monastery didn't. I wanted to run. I wanted to wake up, but I couldn't move. You're not here to study this place. You're here to join it. You always were." Then it leaned forward and whispered something that broke reality. "Do you remember how many times you've died?" The light changed. Suddenly the room was full of mirrors, dull, warped panes rising from the stone-like teeth. Each reflected a different Elias, one with a burnt face, mouth open in silent scream, one wearing a blood-stained lab coat, carving words into his own chest, one hanging upside down from the ceiling, eyes open, smiling. Only one reflection matched me exactly. And behind it Samuel, "Choose," he said. "Only one can leave. The rest stay. That's the bargain." My mouth open, but made no sound. He raised his hand, snapped his fingers. I woke in my bed, drenched in sweat. The stone was back on my chest, still cracked, but now glowing faintly from within. On my knitstand, the coat again, inside its pocket. Another note. This one was typed, not handwritten. "The room of versions is not a dream. Stay out of the south wing. That's where the mouth drinks." No signature, but at the bottom the date. May 17th, 1979, the same date as the voice on the cassette. I found Miriam in the tower at dawn, watching the sky churn gray and copper. I told her what I saw. She didn't deny it. We all meet ourselves here. Eventually, the question is whether you'll remember who you were once it's over. "I don't believe in this place anymore," I said. Her smile was sad. "Belief was never the point. Belief is for gods. This place feeds on proof." I asked her what the monastery really is. Her answer came without hesitation. A survival mechanism for something older than time, a womb for memory, a cathedral for forgetting. Later that night, I opened the drawer of my desk and found a journal. Not mine, but written in my handwriting. A dozen entries, dates ranging from 1882 to 2041. Each one begins with the same sentence. I've found the chapel again. The final page is blank, except for a line scratched into the bottom corner. You have until the mouth opens. No date, no time, but beneath that, drawn faintly in ash, the tree upside down, roots growing into the chapel, and beside it, a small wet handprint. Too small to be mine, I waited until nightfall. The keepers had all withdrawn to their quarters. The monastery groaned with its usual nocturnal settling, the wind in the stone, the deep rhythmic creaks in the foundation, the half-heard voices that traveled through vents and chimneys like birds nesting in the bones of the structure. I passed the chapel. The rift was still open, breathing wider now. It whispered nothing, but it watched. The entrance to the south wing had always been there, a narrow corridor choked with dust and silence. I had seen it a dozen times and never once walked it. It felt invisible not by any enchantment, but through sheer cognitive resistance, like an ulcer in the psyche, something your eyes pass over, because looking too long forces you to remember things better left buried. But tonight I entered. The passage sloped downward. The walls grew narrow and slick. Shapes emerged in the stone faces, half-formed, eyes and mouths open, as if gasping in the moment of drowning. My flashlight flickered. The batteries were new. I checked them again, flickered harder, and then darkness swallowed everything but the thin path at my feet. I found myself in a circular chamber, much wider than I expected. The walls were engraved floor to ceiling, with spirals and symbols some I recognized from Navajo petroglyphs. Others I'd seen in no written language. In the center of the chamber stood a stone basin, cracked and rimmed in dried red-black flakes. The smell was unbearable, blood and rust and wet leaves. And then the air changed. A hum began. Deep, low, subsonic, felt in the chest, not heard. It vibrated the marrow in my teeth. And from the wall ahead of me, a projection, not light, not shadow, a memory. I saw a child, naked, trembling, eyes wide and glossy, no more than 7, surrounded by figures in robes, keepers, perhaps, but without faces. They moved in a circle, chanting in a dialect I couldn't process. Not unknown words, forgotten ones. Something primal, something pre-linguistic. My ears rebelled. I felt a trickle of blood from my nose. The child was held down. A blade was drawn, a primitive one, obsidian or flint, raised, lowered, but it never touched flesh. Instead, the blade cut through shadow, and the child's reflection cast on the stone wall bled. The figures caught it in the basin, and I watched as the child's body stiffened, eyes rolled upward, and a second shadow stepped out of him. Another child, identical, empty eye, and the original, gone. I stumbled backward. The projection vanished, but a voice remained. It wasn't a sacrifice, Samuel's voice, behind me. I turned, but he wasn't there, just the basin, just the dark. The voice again, now beside my ear. It was an extraction. I fled. The corridor twisted as I climbed back, longer, sharper, pulsing. At times I felt like I was crawling through living veins. My breath came in gasps. My limbs trembled. When I emerged into the main hall, I collapsed. Miriam was there, waiting. She didn't scold. She didn't speak. She knelt, pressed a cloth to my bleeding nose, and looked into my eyes. You saw one of the early transcriptions, the raw ones I couldn't form words. She nodded. The South Wing remembers. That's why we sealed it. And then, soft as a prayer, you weren't supposed to wake that part of yourself yet. Later that night, I noticed something new. The tree, the one I kept drawing in my sleep, had appeared on the wall beside my bed, but I hadn't drawn it. It was carved. Perfect, symmetrical, roots up, branches down, and along its trunk, tiny names etched in sequence. Mine was there. Not once, not twice, but 8 times, each with a different year. One of them, 2041. A year I haven't lived yet. I stared at the carving until my vision blurred. I reached out to touch my name, and as I did, the wall shifted. Not the stone, the memory. Suddenly, I was no longer in my room. I stood in a hallway lined with glass cases, each holding an artifact. I remember discarding an old field notebook, a tooth I'd once pulled, a photo of Miriam and me from grad school that I'd burned in a fit of grief, and at the end of the hallway, a mirror and an Elias, but not me, not exactly. His skin was cracked like dry stone, his eyes were missing, and still, somehow he was smiling. The mirror did not reflect light, it reflected possibility. I stood there, unmoving, breath shallow, staring at the crack-tied version of myself behind the glass. He didn't mimic me, he studied me, and then slowly he raised one hand, bent finger to palm, a wave, my stomach turned. I stepped closer. The mirror didn't ripple, didn't distort. It simply shifted like a slide reel advancing. Now the figure behind the glass was another Elias, this one skeletal, hollow-cheeked, his scalp marked with carvings as if he'd etched thoughts into bone. His mouth opened and closed silently, as though repeating the same phrase forever. Click. Another Elias, blindfolded, smiling. Click. An Elias hanging by his wrists in a narrow cell. Click. An Elias kneeling in a circle of salt, eyes black with soot. Click, click, click. Each version of me reduced, reshaped, recycled. Every outcome preserved until finally the glass showed me. But I was outside the monastery, on the road, smiling as if I'd just arrived. And then the smile broke, and the figure mouthed a phrase. I read it easily. I've said it myself. It's not your first time here. I fled the mirror. My legs carried me without consent, down corridors that felt thinner, older, hungrier. I ended up in the archive again, except now it had changed. It was larger, shelves climbed higher, the walls pulsed with a subtle hum. The mural was no longer charcoal, it was flesh. The concentric circles of writhing forms were now animated, shifting in and out of the stone as if the rock itself were dreaming. I watched my own likeness flicker through the mural, blinking in and out of existence, sometimes as a child, sometimes as an old man, sometimes both at once. A drawer in the far cabinet was open. Inside, a file folder marked Thorn, Elias. Cycle 9. I opened it. Inside, a page with my own signature dated 1938. A list of my personal items, including I'd never seen before, cedar tooth and skin bell. A psychological profile concluding. Subject resists integration. Memory scrub unsuccessful. Subject remains semi-aware. Observe before recycling. There was a final line in red ink. Retrieve all versions for assimilation. Begin memory collapse. The monastery shifted. I don't mean the building, I mean everything. I stepped into what should have been my room and found myself back in the circular chamber beneath the south wing. The one with the blood basin, only now there were chairs arranged around it. 6. All filled, all Elias, they turned to face me. None spoke. Then the stone on my chest vibrated just once, and the Elias across from me the burn, one leaned forward and hissed, "You're the last. The whole memory depends on you." I turned to run. The door wasn't there. Only the sound of the rift opening again. I found myself back in the chapel, or something shaped like it. The walls breathed. The rift now split the altar in half. It was enormous, floor to ceiling, pulsing, throbbing like a heart exposed, and in it a shape, no clear outline, no form the human mind could cling to, only limbs folded in impossible symmetry, only mouths where mouths shouldn't be, only eyes that blinked out of sequence. It did not move, it did not speak, but I felt its presence like a weight behind the eyes, a knowing, and from within the rift, my own voice layered over itself 1,000 times. If the earth forgets us, we become real. I staggered into the courtyard, collapsed in the dust. Miriam found me minutes or hours later. She didn't ask what I'd seen. She just knelt, laid a hand on my shoulder. "You're reaching terminal recursion." I stared at her, lost. She explained softly, like to a child. "Each return fractures you, splits you. This place can't hold too many versions. You're near the limit." I asked her what happens then. Her smile was neither kind nor cruel. "Then the monastery must choose which version to keep." That night, I woke in the middle of the corridor outside my room. Someone had dragged me there and written in ash on the wall opposite me, "Bury yourself or be buried," and beneath it, a crude drawing, an open mouth with roots inside, and hanging from the roots, a dozen Elias figures swinging. There's a phrase that keeps repeating in my thoughts, though I have no memory of ever hearing it aloud. To end the loop, the original must refuse the copy. What that means, if anything, is impossible to say, but it was written in my journal this morning in charcoal. I didn't write it. I've stopped sleeping, or perhaps I'm always sleeping. Time is no longer a hallway. It's a hole. The Elias with the carved scalp stood outside my room tonight, watching, not speaking. The others appeared to some flickering in and out like corrupted film reels. I think the monastery is weakening, or maybe I am. If I don't end this soon, one of them will take my place. I decided to seal the rift, not with tools, not with force, but with intention. I remembered what Miriam said. The monastery feeds on memory. It doesn't need blood, it needs narrative, identity, versions of the same person, fraying, looping, diverging. If I could destroy the connective tissue, my memory, I could starve it. I returned to the archive. I found the drawer labeled Thorn. Active versions inside, a map, not of land, of selves. 9 points, 8 crossed out, 1 pulsing in red. I traced it, found its location marked on the monastery blueprint. A chamber I hadn't yet visited, the crypt of refusals. The way down was wet with condensation. Salt crusted the walls. I passed hundreds of carvings, each a face, screaming. Some of them were mine. At the bottom, a stone door sealed in wax, the same wax that sealed the envelope that brought me here. I pressed the cracked stone against it. The wax melted away instantly. The door groaned and opened. It was a rotunda carved from black stone that shimmered like wet obsidian. The air stank of salt and memory. 7 statues lined the wall, each depicting a death. One hanged, one burnt, one torn apart, one kneeling in supplication, one fused with roots, one curled like a child, one melting, and in the center, a basin full of water, or at least something that mimicked water. I looked in. I saw myself. But not just as I am. I saw every version of me folded into one reflection, a collage of failure, of entropy, of recurrence. And beneath the surface, something moved, a second face, Samuel. He opened his mouth, and I heard the phrase again. To end the loop, the original must refuse the copy. I drew a knife from the archive, earlier bone-handled, iron-forged, still warm to the touch. I carried it now. I stood before the basin, raised the blade, and stabbed it into my own hand. Blood spilled across the water. My reflection shattered. The basin held a sound without origin. The floor cracked, the statues wept ash, and the monastery shook. I felt it, a tearing, a disconnection. One of the versions had just died, not vanished, collapsed. The walls of the monastery buckled, rooms changed again. But now violently, unpredictably, the refectory became a tunnel. The dormitory now spiraled into black. The chapel impossibly was upside down. The bell tower rang a tone I felt in my molars. Miriam found me staggering through a hallway that had turned to glass. She looked older, weathered, as if the act of sealing the basin had drained her. You've broken the containment. They're all waking now. Good, I said. She shook her head. No, Elias, you don't understand. There were never just 9. There were never just you. And then, the monastery isn't just remembering you, you're just the one it liked best. That night, the Elias with no eyes came to me again. He reached out a hand, pressed something into mine. It was the tooth, a cedar tooth listed in the archive file, warm, still bleeding. I looked down. The palm it sat in was not mine, was younger, fresher. A version of me I no longer remembered. And then the voice from the chapel rift boomed, clear and final. Choose the version you want the world to forget. The cedar tooth pulsed in my palm like a second heart. Its heat wasn't fire, it was memory, dense, knotted, invasive. I tucked it into my coat and headed back to the chapel. Now so warped it could no longer be called a room, the walls folded like cloth. The rift reached the ceiling, and through it I could hear chanting, not in a language, but in intention. I crossed the threshold without ceremony. Inside the rift, everything changed. There is no geometry here, no up, no down, only a vast interior hollow lit by the nervous twitch of bioluminescent veins. I walked on bark or something like it, fibrous and slick, shifting with each step like walking on the muscle beneath dead skin. The chamber spiraled downward into a vast root cathedral. Limbs of stone and memory twisted together like knotted intestines. Eyes blinked in the wood. Teeth human, animal, unknown jutted from the trunks like moss-covered relics, and in the center, a massive, breathing knot dot the memory root, 15 feet high, slick, wet, throbbing, and embedded in it. Versions of me dozens, some away, some twitching, some dead, all preserved like insects in amber. I stepped closer. The air vibrated with static tension. From the root came a voice, my voice, multiplied and bent. You are not an individual. You are a category. You are not a man. You are the pattern this place remembers best. You return because you recur. I screamed back. I am Elias Thorne. A single man, laughter, 100 mouths, 1,000 syllables shivering. You are an echo that learned how to speak. Then it offered the choice, not in words and structure. The knot split, revealing to doors, grown from marrow and splinters. Behind one, a world without me. My legacy erased, my research, my memory, the people I've touched gone. The monastery would live on, but I would not. Behind the other, a world with me, but only the best version. Every other Elias the fractured ones, the dream ghosts, the screaming stone-bound selves would be sacrificed to refine me into the final copy. Select your origin, the root said, or become an infinite draft. I shook. My legs barely held. I knew the truth now. There was no escape, only curation. But before I could choose, a hand on my shoulder, Samuel. But not the child, an adult, early 40s, my age, my brother grown, a possibility that never was. He spoke, calm and steady. You don't choose either. That's the trap. The monastery only survives because we let it define the narrative. He pulled something from his pocket, the photograph, the one with me, smiling. In 1973, he tore it in half. The root screamed. The chamber shook, the limbs retracted. The memory root quivered, then ruptured in one long, wet crack spilling steaming red light, and the stench of rendered memory. The versions inside it woke, some howled, some fled, some attacked each other. Samuel turned to me. You were never supposed to come back. None of us were. We're the ghosts this place uses to rehearse history. But if you reject the premise, the cycle breaks. And with that, he handed me the cedar tooth. Bury it. I stumbled out of the chamber. The monastery was collapsing not in stone, but in consistency. Rooms blinked in and out. People flickered. Time folded in short loops. I saw myself walking backward downstairs. Miriam praying in 3 languages at once. Lucas floating in a hallway, eyes rolled back. I reached the chapel and dug into the cracked altar stone with my bare hands. Blood, dust, bone. I made space. Laid the tooth inside. Covered it. The stone pulsed once, then silence. But as I collapsed, the rift whispered, one last time, if the earth forgets you, who will remember what you did? Then, darkness, I woke up to wind, real wind. Not the breath of a building, not the whisper of memory, desert wind. I was lying in the dust at the base of the monastery steps, my clothes torn, my hands bloody, my mouth full of ash. No one around, no Elias, no Samuel, no Miriam, just sun-bleached stone and a long, empty trail. The rift was gone, so was the chapel, so was most of the monastery. Only the front facade remained like a movie set, left behind after filming ended. The windows were hollow, the walls cracked, and on the main door, scratched in something deep and dark, nitrogen monoxide entry. Memory closed. I stumbled back down the path I couldn't find when I first arrived. Now it was there, crude but visible, foot-worn, sun-baked. My truck somehow waited where I never parked it. Inside, the keys, engine turned, Radio played static. The road out was too easy. No forks, no illusions, no shifting landmarks. The land let me go like a bad dream forgotten by morning. But the further I drove, the more something felt wrong. Road signs bore no familiar names. Gas stations didn't recognize my ID. My phone had no service, but the date was 2 years ahead of when I arrived. 2 years gone, I found a town, Los Palomas. Not on any map I own. I stumbled into a small municipal building and begged the receptionist to look me up. She typed my name, frowned. Sorry, Dr. Thorne. No records. What about Barclay UC system? She shook her head. There's no faculty under your name. I checked my wallet. My ID was gone, replaced with a laminated card I'd never seen. Elias H. Thorne, Memory Containment Volunteer. Level 4. No logo, no issuing authority. I returned to my hotel if it was a hotel and searched online for any trace of myself. There was nothing. No journal publications, no archived lectures, no birth certificate. It was as if my name had been scrubbed, not hidden erased. But the world remembered one thing. A conspiracy theory blog called The Hollow Record, maintained by an anonymous poster using the handle @EchoHost9. It featured one entry, The Monastery in the Mouth, Case Study of Temporal Identity Dissolution, author redacted, keywords, root structures, self-fragmentation, recursion loops, memory fossilization, date, March 1st, 2041. The same you etched beside my name on the chapel wall. I clicked the audio file at the bottom of the page. It played my voice, reading the words I hadn't written yet. That night, I felt it again, the pulse in the ground. In my spine, I walked outside, the wind died. A sound far behind me like stone grinding on stone. I turned back toward the empty road leading to the cliffs, and I saw it, the monastery, whole again, but reversed, like it had been printed in negative stone, bleach white, shadows long, doors inverted, and above the gate a new sign, now remembering, and standing in front of it, Samuel, older, taller, wearing a coat like mine. He waved just once. I blinked, he was gone. The road was gone, only the desert remained, and in my coat pocket a stone, smooth, still cracked, still warm, and scratched into its surface was something sharp and precise. One more version left. I didn't go back to the monastery. I couldn't. There was no road, no trail, no sign it had ever been there. But I didn't need a map anymore. The pulse was in me, not metaphorically, literally. Every so often, once a week, maybe I feel it. A low thrum in the molars, a tug at the back of the skull, a warmth behind the eyes, like something is checking, counting. I tried to rebuild a life. I moved east, rented a cabin, no phone, no files. I burned everything, notes, journals, the cassette tape. It didn't help. People recognize me, not by name, by pattern. A waitress in Utah said, "You look like someone who used to come through here." Every few years, always quiet, always gone by morning. A mechanic in Montana called me Doc Echo. A child in Arizona stared at me for a full minute before saying, "You don't stay, do you?" I sleep rarely. When I do, I dream of rooms I've never entered, but know by heart. A spiral staircase leading into black brine. A library with no books, only teeth labeled with dates. A table with a chair across from me, empty, until I blink, then full with another me. Each dream ends the same way. A stone in my mouth, cracked, still warm. Last week I found a letter taped to my cabin door, no stamp, no envelope. Typed, you chose refusal, so now you carry it. The root still dreams, but it no longer knows your shape. That means you're free, or at least different. Use it well. Elias, there won't be another chance. I folded the letter and burned it. The ashes smell like cedar. The truth came not in a vision or a scream, but during an ordinary moment. I was brushing my teeth, spit blood, looked up, and my reflection did not blink. It stared, waited, then smiled, and I remembered all of it. The monastery is not a place, it is a system. A psychic cyst formed at the junction of guilt, recursion, and memory. When trauma festers long enough, it fossilizes. When enough minds forget the same wound, it gains weight. Eventually it becomes architecture. What they called the monastery was one such structure. A memory root with enough identity sediment to begin self-curation. I was not special, just useful. I asked questions, took notes, carried fragments between cycles. Now I am a container. I've started writing again, but not for me. Not even for those who might read this. I'm writing to mark where the next version of me will begin. Because the monastery never dies, it only moves. Somewhere out there, the root is still whispering. It just needs another version to open the door. This morning, a child left a rock on my porch, smooth, cracked, still warm, and carved into it, barely visible, where the earth forgets us. I turned it over. On the other side, we become real.